Йоу-йоу-йоу-йоу-йоу-йоу. Ковш, Москва. Сыграем трек специально для нашей флейвы топ-90s, топ-90s, топ-90s. Топ-90s, топ-90s, топ-90s.
On the Rockfin and everywhere else. Good morning. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Slow News Day Live. My name is Steve+Poikonen. I'm hanging out here in the middle of California. Hope you're all doing well. Hope if you celebrate the holiday season, you had a good Christmas and everything else. It is it's Boxing Day. I am not sure what that means, although if I have to, I will punch somebody. We're gonna have a really good show today. Joining me here in a few minutes is gonna be James+Lindsay, founder of the New+Discourses, I guess whole fucking institute and publishing arm, podcast, everything. Getting flown around the country, speaking everywhere. So looking forward to that. In the meantime, let me run through the business here real quick. That QR code belongs to Matrix Bars. They sponsor the show. I say the occasional nice thing about the product, and they occasionally send me a little bit of it. 3.5 grams of delicious chocolate and psilocybin mushrooms. They come in 4 wonderful flavors. I do wonder if there's going to be a rebranding after that shit show of a movie. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't. I'm going to be honest. I had no real desire to either, other than to, I guess, self-torture and put me through some stuff I don't want to be. Let's see. Oh, that's right. All of the other donate links and all of that stuff. I hope I got that stuff into the show notes. I'm not entirely sure. We do have an emergency-ish GoFundMe up and running right now because my truck got holocausted. If you are at all able to donate to that, please do. I'm going to go ahead and shove that in the chatty chat real quick. Everything else is up and running. Please, if you're able, buy the Tech Ninja coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Bort, B-O-R-T. And with that, let me go ahead and bring in this morning's guest. The whole story behind why this rather pleasant looking and sounding gentleman has found himself hated is fascinating to me. Maybe we'll get into that. Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. From the New+Discourses podcast institute publishing arm, I guess, branch of World Conquest, James+Lindsay. How are you doing?
I'm all right. Thank you. How are you?
I'm hanging in there. Hope you had a Merry Christmas. And I'm not sure what we're supposed to do on Boxing Day. I have no idea.
Sober up? No, I don't know.
Right? Yeah. I guess they wanted to make, for a while, there's been talk of making New Year's Day National Hangover Day, where it's just understood that nobody's going to do anything. And I kind of feel like if that's true, then the terrorists win.
Yeah, that's probably true. I mean, I'm not hungover today, so I didn't drink that much. I had a little bit of wine last night after dinner, and that's about it. So we're doing good.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I have the COVID, so I'm only okay.
Oh no. Well, hopefully it's the Omicron and you don't have any of those other variants. Hopefully you don't have that FIFA variant, man. That looks severe.
Yeah, the FIFA variant's not good, and I don't want to get the last Obamacron that's coming on eventually either. No, I it's quite mild, whatever it is. I only have like a couple of rough hours at night before I go to bed, and just every day I wake up and I think, oh, I'm better, and then I have about 2 real intense hours every night.
Well, here's to a speedy recovery. We got hit with, my family did, in like November of 2019, before they actually said it was here. We got laid out, and then a couple of months later, everything that they had described as a COVID alpha symptom we had.
Right.
And the whole house had our asses kicked on and off for about 10 days, and then it was gone, and nobody's been sick with anything since.
Wow.
And this is all pre, we didn't really know about early treatments. My ex-wife kind of granola anyway, so she was overdosing everyone on vitamin C. We were still going, it wasn't pouring rain in the redwood forest at the time, still going outside, still getting vitamin D, still trying to like exercise or sweat or push a little bit of it out. It took a while, but the idea that I'm going to be a little bit careful because we're still on YouTube at this point. But the idea that you can address a nation about a health crisis and never once mention diet, exercise, over-the-counter preventatives or treatments has always been insane to me. Did you notice that right off the bat, or was that something?
Oh yeah, totally. It's always been a bit nuts to me too, and a bit, a bit. Yeah. Just
I mean, there's that Bill Hicks bit where he's starting to go into the JFK thing, and they're telling him to not bring it. It's just that, to take over a totalitarian state. No, but you let it go, Bill. Let it go. And it's kind of like that at this point, where when you're talking to somebody and you're trying to have even a casual conversation, you just kind of want to be like, well, it is, ushering in the fourth industrial revolution, a techno tyranny. So perhaps we should be a little bit more concerned about some of the larger, broader aspects of this, as opposed to, who may or may not have the sniffles. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you, but maybe it's just the two of us. Who knows?
I have found that as the narrative around this is crumbling, and it is big time, and it has been
big time.
The tendency by the people who have been pushing it is those that petty tyrants have demonstrated all throughout history, where they just lash out and try and push the propaganda harder. And I'm very curious as to what you think the fallout from that will be, especially when first responders and police and firefighters and nurses have been at the front line of not just the fake applause, but also the first to go when the rounds of refuseniks were losing their employment.
Yeah, this is, so we are in the phase where, in a sense, the narrative is crumbling. I was going to say the jig is up, but I don't know that the jig is quite up. They're definitely pushing as hard as they can now. I've been telling people, my opinion is that they've crossed the Rubicon, and they know they've crossed the Rubicon. In other words, they have no path back to, being accepted. And the accountability phase, in other words, is coming once they lose the ability to keep pushing the way that they're pushing now and have people accept it in sufficient numbers. And so what we're seeing then is the rapid hollowing out of trusts and institutions. I literally spoke with somebody yesterday who, while taking out the trash after Christmas lunch, slipped, I think is in an icier region than where I am, where it's abnormally warm for Christmas, but slipped and fell and seems to have possibly broken her wrist, and refused to go to the hospital because she was afraid that they would vaccinate her against her consent. And she's already had COVID quite severely, actually, and recovered, and so sees no reason why she should have to take an injection to get immunity to something she's already, or alleged immunity to something she's already immune to. And so, but when you see something like this is a level of distrust in the institution that's very hard to comprehend in terms that we might consider normal. And what we're going to see is that rapidly accelerating as they put the pedal to the metal. Just like I predicted when the FDA decided to approve whatever, the shot or whatever it was. I don't remember if it was that or some drug or whatever. I just said, what's this going to do for millions upon millions of people? It's going to discredit the FDA. It's not going to increase the credit of the thing that they're pushing. And what we're seeing is that the number of people for whom that's true continues to increase. I think it's increasing more rapidly than ever, especially after the White House wished us a winter of death the other day for Christmas. I mean, at this point, it is the hollowing out of any trust in any institution that's been infected, with very little clarity on what pathway might rescue the institutions. Like, let's say we could snap our fingers and all this, attempted techno tyranny, if we want to call it that, grinds to a halt. Everybody who's been involved decides that we're not going to do this anymore. The trust in the institution, there's a process that is going to be required that will take years before that's coming back. And I don't even know what that process looks like. I know it probably begins with removing a lot of people from positions that they're in that are not going to be happy to be removed from them. But I don't know what it looks like. And we're in a different era of the world. Everything's so digital now. You look at what happened at the fall of other regimes, and different things have happened in different places. The Khmer Rouge is the most interesting case historically, because they literally went to Pol Pot and his people and they said, go live somewhere else and just get out of power. And they didn't put anybody in, almost nobody. Just a few people went to jail. A few people got killed. And they had murdered 3 million Cambodians. And their response was, go find a farm in the middle of nowhere and leave us alone, and everything's fine. And that's what happened. So I don't know what comes next, but I don't know how
in fairness, maybe they knew that Pol Pot came with the full backing of Kissinger and the CIA.
Well, true.
And they were like, we're you could go do the thing on the farm. We're not going to come at you because we don't want the repercussions from your friends.
Might
so
be
go
true.
take the farm.
Might be true.
But I mean, that's just, I don't know. But I don't know to what extent the people who were actually, victims of that particular massacre, how much they knew in terms of who Pol Pot was working with or at the behest of,
Right.
I was born a few years later.
Yeah, same. Well, not to divert too far into that, but as far as what I see coming is the massive delegitimization in the coming year of many of these institutions. And then as this is a kind of a cycle, a vicious circle, if you will, where as they get delegitimized, they scream for legitimacy even harder. And there's going to be this weird phase that I don't know what it's going to entail. Now, I actually think that the people in charge are very likely to do something far more. Like, I think they got plan B, like use COVID to achieve goal was plan A. And plan A, actually, that was actually probably plan B. Plan A was probably get Hillary Clinton elected and just slide into it. And plan B was, unleash the coof or whatever led to that. And then plan C or whatever the next plan is. I mean, they tell you got Klaus Schwab coming on his podcast or whatever it is that he does, all these talks he does in his tuxedo or his spacesuit or whichever thing he's wearing that day. And he's like, the inconvenience of COVID-19 will be nothing compared to the cyber pandemic. And it's like, you know what they're telling you what they're going to do. So he's like, massive supply chain disruptions, they're going to screw with the computers. And it's like, okay. And, I don't think they're just going to let it go. But the thing is that, they've had 2 plans so far that haven't come together. I don't know if, what they're going to attempt next, but I don't think it's going to be better. I think it's going to be much worse. But the thing is the question becomes how many people see through it and how many people think, oh my gosh, this is just so coincidental that another terrible thing centered by exactly the same people that was predicted and practiced by exactly the same people in advance is happening again. So, I mean, I don't know. Delegitimization of our institutions and kind of 6th generation guerrilla warfare is what I anticipate for 2022, though.
So I'm more on that. I'm more on that white pill shit, man. I really am, and
I am right now too.
And I'm coming at it from more of a like an agorist perspective, we're market anarchist kind of thing. And this to me presents, and I think I may have even heard you discuss this to some degree, at least the opportunity for kind of a second enlightenment.
That's what I think is happening, actually.
And we've got, we have never truly had the access to essentially the Alexandria or the Library at Alexandria and beyond. Never before we had that in a way that we've been able to communicate as plebs or as part of, even like a middle class. We've never been able to communicate this information. A lot of this has been locked away. I do a lot of on the ground activism in and around Julian Assange's case, because to me, free press, all of this hinges on a free press. And I don't care what the fuck you support. I don't care what your cause is, school choice to anti-war to whatever. If there's no free press, you're screaming at each other or into the void, and that's fucking it. And there's got to be some safeguards there. But in this era or potential for a second enlightenment, there has to be less fractionalization than there is. And I am starting to see, for the first time in 20 years of me begging for it, people starting to form up along, okay, well, it's us against them for real this time. I don't honestly care what your politics are right now.
Yeah, exactly.
At the same time where the culture war is never waged harder.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really funny for me to say this because I couldn't possibly be more anti-Marxist, but the argument that I give, I actually, studied the hell out of Marx to do what I do. And so I don't agree with Marx's historicism, of course, but his analysis of history, if you take it as kind of a low resolution, stage driven perspective, isn't wholly off base. He's watching how on the biggest picture, at the biggest scale, he was saying, economies evolve. They evolve, through these different stages. There's a slavery kind of system. And then first there's, communism, but only in little tribes. And there's a slavery kind of system. And then that gives way to an aristocracy. And that gives way to this capitalism thing. And he thought socialism and communism were the answers down the track for whatever his bad motivations were, or bad analysis, or whatever it happens to be. But his historical analysis up to the emergence of capitalism in broad strokes isn't totally wrong. And so it gives at least a nice metaphorical framework. And I think that when we were under what people refer to as the Dark Ages, that we were in a phase where we had a magisterial information economy. The magisterium, the church or whatever, told you what was true, and that's what it was. And that works like slavery. You have this, all-powerful thing that you can't buck against. And if you do, they're going to torture you or something horrible or excommunicate you and whatever. And so what they say is true, the end. Yes, master. Okay. And then we move forward. We have the Enlightenment. And then what people believed is that gave birth to the marketplace of ideas, but it didn't. It gave birth to the aristocracy of ideas. We had institutions, we had particular, types of intelligentsia or whoever, media apparatchiks, whatever it was that got ordained as the information economists or the information landholders, if you will. And what we're seeing now is the breaking free. You can do your own research. I can do my own research. And what we're seeing is the people who are the aristocrats, just like we would have saw 300-400 years ago at the emergence of capitalism, the aristocrats are trying to hold the power that they had. And so they're trying to throttle the free internet. They're trying to throttle the free press. They're trying to, in this kind of last desperate grab through social credit mechanisms and whatever, put absolute control down over, if we might call it, the information economy. And just like the flame of the Enlightenment was not something that they could put out, the flame of the second Enlightenment is not something they're going to be able to put out. And it's going to burn them down. Not necessarily in a literal sense, but it'll demask them. It'll reveal them to be frauds. It'll reveal many of our so-called expert class to be charlatans and egotists. It will actually reveal a large number of them to have been serial criminals. And, it makes total sense when you start realizing what it's going to do to people who have been able to lord around as the information aristocrats for the last couple of centuries and their buddies, that they're going to freak out and do everything they can to prevent that deposing of them, especially the ones who are the most sociopathic, because those are the people who are going to be unmasked for having been, career criminals. And we're finding out now, as much as you have to, one should be very cautious with such accusations, but serial pedophiles and things like this, this information is not going to be able to be hidden any longer. Too many people with too many eyes or too many backgrounds looking at this, at every aspect of everything now. And the flame of truth is burning, and it is burning down an architecture that held up their crooked estates.
And there's a willingness for all of those people to talk with each other too, like, and collaborate with each other. And I don't I do not have the same academic experience as you. I walked away from a semester at Purdue to go travel and do a bunch of other stuff. And I guess this qualifies now. I have lived experience, James+Lindsay. I do. Of just about every facet of life, of a way to live. I've had significant amounts of money and pissed it away. I have been homeless and everything in between, and so that's where the bulk of my education and perspective has come from. In this era of the internet, I've been able to, and libraries, spend a lot of time in libraries, man. But the willingness, I guess what I noticed when I was at college is people wanted to talk at each other, but they didn't want to listen as much. That happens to a degree on social media. But when you get into a subspace of social media, it becomes much, much more collaborative. And people are much, much more willing to like share ideas and, I take little bits and pieces from one and the other and put them together. The whole open source community is based on this. And when you're not yelling at each other, the propensity to work with each other increases exponentially. And we can do this on an international scale now. And
Right.
that is one of the ways that I believe that we win.
Yeah, I'm totally, what I tell people is that I'm long-term white-pilled because I don't think that they can put this fire out. I don't think we're getting there smoothly. I don't know what the digital world analog of the 30 Years' War is. I have no idea what that's going to look like, but I don't think that these people who are in power and in charge are just going to let this go. And of course, they have their hands on some mighty levers, but so do regular people. So do regular people. I mean, technically, we just saw this story about the vaccine thing, right? In Brazil, some hacker, I don't know what happened. I don't know the details well, and I'm obviously not condoning any illegal activity, but some hacker hacked their database of who has been and who has not been vaccinated and deleted it from the Brazilian government. One dude. So, you break all of a sudden their entire program is just in shambles because one guy decided, 400-pound guy in the basement somewhere probably decided to wipe everything clean. And so, I don't know what it looks like. There are lots of ways they can try to make our lives miserable. I expect that warfare, like I said, 6th generation, I think we missed 5th generation almost completely. But 6th generation warfare is going to be mostly memes and shit posting on the internet, while big players do things like create supply chain disruptions and screw around with that so that the people are made uncomfortable. And
did you know that the
starved.
U.S. military has a mimetic warfare division?
Do they?
Yes, there is a division of mimetic warfare in all branches of the U.S. military, and then it's also down to like some of the 3-letter agencies have meme war divisions. I'm not kidding.
Is that why they show up all looking like feds to like everything though?
Dude, so they can't help that. I don't think they don't get paid enough to go to like different barbers. They all got to go to the same guy. He only knows 3 styles. They all got to walk around with that fucking face. I can't. There's a field agent contingent where some of these guys really want to be CIA when they grow up, and the CIA almost exclusively is down to like Mormons now. And they've got these like, I don't know. There's somebody that was describing them as, just no-neck Mormons. The linebackers at Brigham Young, and that's who the CIA is largely recruiting now. So when the feds come in, when the wannabe feds come in, they're all trying to fill that particular mold.
No,
and
right.
They're all just a couple of courses of steroids away from getting there.
Gotcha. Well, they're not doing a great job. This is again more of that white pill. This is more of that information economy getting free. there were a number of events in the past 12 months, let's say at least, that I think in any previous year people would have saw much controversy around, but instead they just quietly got hushed up and tucked away because people were like, look, this is so and so, he's a Fed, this is so and so, he's a Fed, and and it just kind of see through it like almost immediately now. And this all of the techniques that they've developed to manipulate the populace, except for mass media bombardment, have more or less been seen through in the past 18 to 24 months, which changes the playing field rather tremendously. What we don't have, however, is the normie core breaking away from mass media, or I should say corporate media, because it could be big, it could be mass or whatever. And what we don't also have is, even within the kind of more sophisticated set, realizing how alt media can very quickly become quietly become corporate media through one check you didn't know ever got written. So there are still aspects of this where they have some pretty powerful weapons, but I don't know, stuff's shifting. And I think what we're going to see, the big running joke is, the communists ran their long march to the institutions and culminated it at precisely the moment that the institutions stopped mattering.
Yes. That's, I mean, it it is. They shut down school almost entirely, turned it into this Zoom hell where I have two kids that are, one's in high school, one's in elementary school. And fortunately, they're in one of the lone holdout cities in California that didn't put up with this mess at all. And there was a teacher revolt against masks before Newsom shut it down. And the administration was like, well, I guess we'll look the other way about it, and so they were able to get away with it. But no, you're absolutely correct. I want to kind of jump here real quick because the other day I saw you on my friend Clint's show, Liberty Lockdown, and you guys were talking about whether or not Trump was there on purpose, or whether it would have been easier to go for Hillary Clinton. And I kind of wanted to wild out on that for a minute, because I don't for a moment believe that the government that we get to see is anything other than a performance by and large, especially at the federal level. I don't think that you're necessarily allowed to be elevated to the position of president unless there's a guarantee that you're going to play when it push comes to shove. I don't necessarily think that Trump was plan A, but I think that there was a long-standing plan B for cartoonish demagogue, and that there were timetables such as UN Agenda 21 and UN Agenda 2030 that world leaders have openly talked about for the last 4 years as sustainable goals that they needed to meet. And no, there's nothing conspiratorial about it. We just meet behind closed doors in private to plan for the outcome of future events in our benefit. That's nothing conspiratorial about that, though. It's just what we do. And that it's not even that Donald Trump was just a chaos agent that they had to rein in. They had to get, they caught him by surprise or whatever. There was a plan for that character, not necessarily Donald Trump. And the biggest obstacles they had was to keep him from tripping over his own dick every time he woke up and picked up his phone.
No, I don't think I'm that cynical yet. I think that Donald Trump was a big surprise to them, and I think that their bizarre overreaction at every turn is the best evidence for that. Now, of course, it is possible that that's all part of the theater, but I'm not. I'm not saying necessarily that you're wrong, but I'm not convinced of that. And I still think that the best read on the way that they reacted to Trump, which was to freak out, absolutely go full blast, freak out psyops. Every minute of every day had to be Trump this, Trump that, the whole thing. And they telegraphed so much when they did that I actually think that they thought for a while until they figured out how to manipulate his particular character traits, that they had lost the control at the level that they're used to having. Because as far as the election goes, I think they thought that they could make sure Hillary would win, and that's why they were predicting her at 99+%. And I'm sure they massaged the numbers to ensure that Hillary would win. And then the turnout for somebody who appeared to the American public as a fighter absolutely overwhelmed their preparations to be able to massage those numbers adequately to put Hillary in place. And so they ended up, everybody shocked. Even Trump said he was shocked. They ended up holding the bag and trying to figure it out. And it took until COVID came out that they figured out really a way to manipulate his particular character flaws, with one exception, which is, and I hate to say this, but because it's something we should normally think of as quite noble, Trump's biggest soft spot, of course, is his love for his daughter, Ivanka, who is, all up in the World Economic Forum business. And then, of course, she's married to Jared. And so Jared gets this massive amount of influence with Trump that otherwise would not be possible. And of course, they surrounded him with people who hamstrung him at every turn, and made sure things. He had terrible advice. Knowing another character trait of his is that he listens to everybody, but not deeply. He gets advice from a million people, doesn't really listen deeply to anybody, and then makes a decision. But in the end, I mean, we see it now with his reaction to his touting, actually, of the vaccine program and the booster and every other thing. In the end, they caught him where he's weakest, which is his pride. They told him he was doing something that had never been done before. No president has ever accomplished something this glorious, this fast, this under such pressure and the whole thing. And now he's, they caught him in his pride, which is obviously his biggest weakness. But I don't think that they expected him, actually. Maybe, but it seems, the most enduring legacy of his presidency, among all of the different things that he did, I think, is having called out the news as fake news repeatedly, turning their own meme back on themselves, and did so extraordinarily successfully, to where literally tens or hundreds of millions of people saw that this is the case, that the news media are fake, or the corporate press, at any rate, are fake, and that they're all propagandist, even Fox, of course. And so I find it difficult to accept that he was theater. I do find it easy to accept that he was more controllable, and that the so-called swamp was a deeper and uglier mess than he had bargained for. But I won't say that what you're saying is impossible either. I think that we're looking at a bull in the china shop who still had a ring in his nose, and once they figured out how to grab a hold of it, though, they do what they do.
I could accept 100% of that. I can, and at the same time, I can look at the $25.7 trillion that Donald Trump printed starting from August of 2019 to the time he walked out of office. I can look at the increased number of drone strikes from one president to the other, to the other, to the other. Like, I can see business operating as usual the entire time that he was in office. He gave the GOP the blue ribbon agenda they had been trying to pass with every previous president since Reagan. And at the same time was the only president to put forward negative gun legislation in the modern era. There are a number of things that he did under the radar that were totally, completely refused to be reported on specifically around the printing of the money, because it
Right.
makes everybody look bad. And I feel like while everything that you just went through is accurate analysis and a realistic assessment, there's a Peter Dale Scottish permanent institution, not just in DC, but what that operates like the Five Eyes Global Intelligence Sharing Network would probably be the easiest way to put it, but I mean they're essentially functionaries of the banking cartels. I'm trying to be careful. We're on YouTube. I don't want to
No,
say
of
words
course.
that are going to give, I don't know. It seems like when the WikiLeaks releases came out disclosing the Pied Piper candidates, and you saw Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, and I think Ben Carson as the candidates of the Clinton campaign would like to elevate as the ones they would most prefer to run against, and have the media, focus on them and have them sort of Pied Piper the attention away from Hillary Clinton, who was in a lot of trouble, not just for emails, but for Ukraine and for all kinds of other things. The Awan brothers scandal was breaking. There were all kinds of stuff that really, and she was just wholly unlikable, and may in fact be a lizard person. I don't know.
Yeah, I got in trouble with my wife even at the time for not liking her as a person. And that says people who voted for her. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't see how you can. She's just a wholly unlikable human being. But I'm not suggesting that the day that Donald Trump got elected, there were people saying, "Oh, the plan went everything went according to plan." What I'm suggesting is that a demagogish figure, like, there's a plan for that character. There's a plan for the character of doddering old man. There's a plan for the character of Black Jesus. There's a plan for the character of, whatever they want Kamala Harris to be, which is nothing more than a dead-eyed, soulless servant to power. So she's fantastic for that role.
in the milieu in which she was appointed to that, she's also the invincible object. She is a woman of color, which means every criticism, and this is the key thing everybody must understand about Kamala, is that she's a woman of color, and they appointed her according to, she's a diversity hire of the most cynical form. She's not merely a token to say we're the Democrats, we're progressive, look what we got into power, the first ever history, but no, it's that, just like we saw with Boston's mayor just a moment ago, a few days ago, come out with some horrible thing, people go berserk and they say, well, it's just because I'm a woman of color. It's patriarchy and racism that's causing people to not like what I'm saying. And so, that's the weapon of Kamala. At least as far as, or maybe it's the armor of Kamala or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I get this. Certainly, I wouldn't disagree that they have contingency upon contingency upon contingency for different kinds of characters rolling into different kinds of positions. And having been students of history, they have decent guesses as to who might get elevated by, popular vote or whatever. But the playbook they ran against Trump was so over the top.
Wasn't it? It was almost like they were priming the pump for a mass formation event.
Maybe.
Almost.
I mean, I still think that they got taken with their pants down. Like, they didn't know what to do.
Yeah, I'll concede that on the front end, 100%. Looking at DHS memos going back over the course of a decade, looking at a lot of different things that have been proposed and were too early, digital ID being one of those things, medical tech wearables being one of those things, injectables that will diagnose you, which are being talked about, discussed, and rolling out. Like, all of those things were way ahead of their time. They tried lockdowns before, it didn't work. They tried pushing a pandemic and it didn't work. And I kind of feel like that as surprising as Donald Trump was to a huge faction of government, there was also, and we saw this, a faction of government that was like, oh my God, maybe we can actually go do some of the more nationalistic things that we've been trying to do. Maybe we can actually rein in some military spending. Maybe we could actually withdraw for some wars. Maybe we could actually do some of the things that candidate Trump was talking about. A lot of it just comes down to who's willing to believe the marketing and how committed to that marketing they are. Bill Binney, who's become a friend of mine. I don't know if you're familiar with him or not.
Mm-mm.
He was a NSA code breaker. He wrote the original Stellar Wind the program that became Stellar Wind that invaded all of our private. He previously wrote spyware that would not infiltrate the privacy of every living American citizen for the NSA. He ended up becoming a whistleblower. There's a documentary out about him called A Good American. It's excellent. But he became one of the people who really, truly bought into the Trump marketing as a member of the national security community. Yeah. And still with friends active in the community. So I do think that a commitment to the bit, as it were, drove a lot of, I don't know, the hopium that still exists among my friends on the right, where they're looking at former Guantanamo Bay guard and Israel's bitch Ron DeSantis as like the leader of, a free people. I understand the good things are happening in Florida. I got a lot of friends in Florida, and I'm probably going to be visiting soon. But I also don't think that and you were just at Turning Points USA. What's the vibe? What's the vibe? I mean, aside from, flames on stage and the hype ass.
I love the
walkout.
flames on stage, actually. Just talk about that for 1 second because people are pissed about it. I love it. I actually love it. It's like just the whole mood of everything right now. And I know you can say anybody wants to say about performance, whatever. Nobody's allowed to have fun anymore. And it's just over the top and it's fun and it's in the budget. And they're not like some massive charity, like screwing over some orphaned kids or something because they put pyrotechnics on the stage. It's just fun. Like literally, it's huge fun. So what's that? Why did I bring that up? Because the energy, first of all, of course, Turning Point skews young, right? It skews college age, just out of college age, probably up to mid to late 20s. There were a lot of this was America Fest, not a student action summit. So America Fest, of course, there were a lot of parents there. There were a lot of adults there who aren't just speakers or professionals or movement types, but and there were a lot of people there. From what I understand, although I didn't confirm this, that there were over 10,000 attendees, which is an astronaut. I mean, this is CPAC territory. And in fact, having been to a few CPACs now, this is the most fun and I think successful big conference I've ever been to. So kudos to them for that, because what it's creating is a massive amount of energy in the young people. And I've talked to a number of young people. Turns out at the airport, as we were leaving, as one would expect, lots of people who were at the conference were at the airport. And then I'm there and I do whatever I can to avoid wearing a mask in an airport as much as I can get away with. So I'm recognizable. And, we ended up having like a little kind of clubhouse over there and then talking to different people. And the next thing we're all talking, and it's just like, these kids, 19, you talk about hopium or whatever you want to call it, but 19 to 20, 22, 25, these people are just like, we're going to win. And here's why. Here's what we're going to do. Our generation is going to be the one that changes everything. And Turning Point is just injecting that we're going to win. There's something worth having here. There's something worth defending. And these people are as skeptical, I think, as somebody their age can get without falling off the tracks of, kind of this whole, well, it was what we said earlier, that there's all of us against, there's a distinct them who's been running the show for a while now to their own interests. And that they're trying to, shuttle us into this fourth industrial revolution. That's definitely all in their interest. The percentage of the kids that seem hip to this kind of line of thought and then seemed absolutely geared up and energized to care about these issues and to do it. The number of 19-year-olds I knew who were telling me stuff about Marx that's just at the edge of my knowledge about Marx, for example, was just staggeringly encouraging. Like I had no sense of any of that at 19. I mean, of course, I was studying physics. I didn't care at all about things like the luxury of what seems like stable state, but these people were on top of it, and I was really properly impressed. So the energy there and the directedness of the energy there is properly encouraging and hopeful. And I think that, whether Turning Point itself is the organization that channels it, I don't know. All organizations have their own issues, their own shortcomings, their own advantages, etc. But the base that it's creating in young people who I think most importantly realize that they're about to have their freedom stolen from them. Not in some way like, oh, we never had it and we got to pretend we had it or whatever. They aren't even going to get to pretend they have it. It's just going to get taken away from them. And they're aware of this and that they're ready to, do what it takes within smart strategic approaches to make sure that goes the other direction. And we go back toward, freedom, constitution, et cetera, the things they're all talking about all the time. Liberty is like the kind of key. Lots of them are very religious, of course, with Turning Point as well, but whatever. Good for them. It gives them a base to stand on. It gives them something that's not easy to take away if they're being serious about their faith, something that you can carry with you even literally into a gulag and hold in your heart, and they can't stop you from having. So, I'm pretty encouraged, and the energy is enormously positive, enormously strong. And in a demoralized population, anything that's giving people enormously positive energy is, I think, just win-win-win, right down to the fireworks on stage and the big production value.
I want to respond to a few of those things, but I'm glad that you brought up the faith thing, because for years I've been trying to get people to recognize that the energy that normally went into a spiritual system, a supernatural belief system, systems of faith, has all been co-opted into political ideology. In a large way, they're trying to change that, or at least hone it in on the science and make the science the official state religion, at least while it's in fashion. And I know that or at least you had like formerly self-described as like new atheist or something to that effect. But do you recognize as society has become increasingly secular, there's been a co-option of that spiritual energy and placed into political ideology, specifically because it seems like the institutions were on their way to doomed to fail, at least back in the Occupy days.
So what I see, and I did a podcast on this recently after having read John Henry Newman, who is a Catholic theologian in the 1850s, and somebody gave me a copy of two of his books, and I read one of them. I haven't had a chance to read the other yet, and I was quite taken by it, and I was quite struck by his kind of characterization of theology and the role that theology plays, in particular in a society. And it's kind of wherever the heart of intellectual life of a society lives, so the role that theology plays at the heart of intellectual life. And so what I see actually is, I see it a little bit differently. What I see is that the way that secularization has proceeded has actually choked out theology. Religion is less important. Theology is what matters. And I don't think that there's necessarily, we have to all agree upon theology, but there has to be a mature and healthy theology or set thereof that are in debate with one another. That's fine too, at the heart of intellectual life. And what we therefore have is a state of not just anemia, but strangulation. And what's happened is that these other theologies, Marxism, for example, whatever, its various new varieties, are like a gangrene that grow in that strangulated, starved tissue, which is society. So society becomes starved because it doesn't have a robust relationship between the various branches of knowledge that all bring them back kind of in one uh, very firmly rooted place. And religion, everybody says, oh, well, it's this, and but if people are more religious, I don't think that that's right. I think people don't. Religion is just as look at liberation theology. It's just Marxism dressed up in a Catholic frock. Black
Or
liberation
Bitcoin.
theology is like the most ridiculous freaking thing in the entire universe. It's literally like James Cone clown shoes. It just makes no sense. And then you look at all the different religious organizations that have been co-opted. Religion's not enough. And in fact, religion is actually irrelevant. Religion is a set of behaviors and things that you attend to and groups of people built atop a theology. So that if the theology is anemic, gangrene is going to come in, and some other, whether we want to use gangrene or cancer, it doesn't matter. Some other gangrenous or cancerous theology is going to grow in that starved societal tissue. And so what we've lost is, so what a theology achieves takes the various branches of knowledge, most probably importantly epistemology, ontology, axiology, sociology, and it brings them into one place. It unifies those under one way of thinking, one cohesive explanation for why are there values? How do we know things? What does it mean to be? What is life about? How do we organize society? How do we understand ourselves in relation to ourselves and in relation to society? And it typically, being a theology, places at the heart of that a single, eternal, uncorruptible object called God, or that stands in the position of the deity, at least when it seems to be a healthy one. What we have is Marxism is absolutely a theology. It's a theology based on making man in himself the center of the universe, that actualizes himself through what Marx considered authentic labor, that eschews all what he called ideology, which is the justifications that the people who work in the superstructure give themselves to continue working in the superstructure and upholding a superstructure. And so Arbeit macht frei in German, as Marx might have had it, or in other words, work makes free, is the heart of the Marxist religion. And that's why you have a religious symbol of the hammer and sickle for communism, is that those forms of hard labor that produce actual physical output that people depend upon are the tools by which you build the garden on earth as a theology. So Marxism is just this weird theology that rather than putting God at the center of all creation, puts man in himself, independent and defiant, at the center of all creation. And following from his thoughts on Hegel believed that the divine, the idea, creates the world, the objective world, and the objective world gives rise in practice to a state, and the state, as Hegel said, is the divine idea as it exists on earth. And then that gives rise to a subjective world, which is the Geist, and the Geist is the spirit of the world, the spirit of the times, the objective or subjective spirit of whatever. It's just this kind of means ghost or spirit, so whatever. And then eventually there's the Geist moves along enough to where there's a revolution in ideas, and so you have this revolutionary framework, I guess. A dialectic is a revolutionary framework. There's a revolution, a new idea, a new state, a new Geist. Marx took this and just turned it upside down. But in the place of the deity as the idea, he said idealism is ideology. It's the same thing. That's what needs to be done away with. That's the problem with the ideologists. So he flipped it upside down and he said, no, the thing at the heart of it, he said, Hegel has it standing on his head. He's got it practical, but he has it upside down. He puts man in himself, independent of all. For man to be independent, he must eschew God. For man to be independent, he must eschew nature. He must work to build the garden. And by building the garden, because he's ultimately Gnostic and anti-realistic, he builds himself. The problem, of course, is that everybody has different views. Everybody has your subjective view of the world, creating the objective world according to an anti-realist perspective, and mine may not agree. And so what you have to do is you have to use the dialectical process to get everybody on the same page, or at least everybody who's still alive. And because it's this godless theology that operates in this way, which has modified over time, Marcuse and the sustainability movement that have come out of the neo-Marxist turn are somewhat theologically different, significantly theologically different. But what you have is this long chain of theologies where you could even hold up Marx as if he were like the Martin Luther of this Gnostic perversion, and then you can hold up Marcuse like he's the John Calvin or something of this pervert. I don't know if he's Calvin's the right guy, but you have this progression of theologians modifying this new theology. And what's happened is, because it's very seductive through ideas like compassion, and it's very seductive in terms of anywhere you have people who kind of have their narcissism, their arrogance literally cultivated, as opposed to their humility cultivated, it becomes a very seductive thing. Oh, we can change the world. We can even change ourselves to be whatever we need to be in order to have a perfect world. And when you have a theology that says, no, I rebuke you, Satan, that's literally evil, and that's become too anemic, then the gangrene of that poisonous theology grows in that tissue. And I think that's actually what we see. So the secularization is actually, to me, because I think of secularization as a form of tolerance, less important, and in fact, most importantly, that it's the state has no business telling you which theology is the one we're going to go with. I see it as less important than the fact that its secularization has been a strangling process upon all thoughts theological, where we should have Catholics, Protestants, Muslims, Orthodox, Buddhists, even, natural law, atheist type libertarians, even just straight up new atheist type scientistic think. These are all kind of theological perspectives or really they are theological perspectives on the world, as if you see as an organized body of knowledge, considering how these things are, all the various sciences are related to one another. They should be in conversation with one another, not necessarily for the purposes of conversion in a mature, healthy society where there's absolute freedom of conscience, but for the purpose of clarifying for oneself and clarifying for each other what everybody is actually talking about and understanding. Not to say that there's some great ecumenicism, because that's poison too. A Catholic and a Protestant should be able to get in a huge theological argument and both come away not in the petulant, lowbrow way, strengthened in their faith, but strengthened their faith because the conversation enriched them both. And secularism is the space in which is a very liberal concept, that can happen without anybody deciding anybody has to get strung up as a result of it, and nobody's going to get put on the rack, nobody's going to get shot or whatever else. And I don't see secularism any further than that. It's the state saying, we're not getting involved in this. You have absolute right to your conscience, and you should be able to dialogue about these things and even enrich yourselves. So what I see is secularization has gone to the point where it has been, I don't want to say misunderstood, because that has some weird, like, there's a perfect pathway, but what it's achieved is strangling the individual theologies rather than creating a space where there's kind of robust debate between them on the public stage. Like,
that's fair.
What, like, Harvard should have in its divinity school, if it wants to have one, it should have, a dozen different faiths represented who are all, very strongly speaking about the theological commitments, and then weighing in on the big debates on campus between the science department and the political science department and the economics department and even the stupid English department, and doing whatever it's doing. And keeping feet on ground in that regard, regardless of if people agree upon the details, I think is the key piece that's been strangled. And that anemia is where the problem has grown.
That's fascinating. So a long time ago, my grandfather was trying to explain to me the difference between what he did as an ordained minister and what he got to do with his doctorate in theology and as a theologian. And I didn't get it. I really didn't. Just I was just too young, and it was a little bit conceptually, a little bit too far out. But I do remember him being a part of a number of interfaith conferences throughout my childhood, and maybe I'm sure it happens. I don't know what to degree it. It's not like I'm in the loop or have a family member who is currently employed, in the ministry, who would be talking about going to interfaith conferences. But I do feel like that's something that, at least as a memory, happened with more regularity than I recall hearing about it in any frequency in the last decade or so. And I do have, a buddy of mine had got his doctorate of divinity at Princeton, 2005, I went out for that party. and we talk regularly, and so I know that he's at least still practicing, he's at least still working, but in terms of what he gets to do with that, I have no idea. And we've also been going about an hour. I don't know how long you can stay. I have a 2-hour show here with the radio and iHeart and all that stuff. You are welcome to stay, leave at your leisure.
All right, we're good for the moment. We can hang out some more. I definitely think, I'm very cautious about the idea of interfaith because it's been a co-opted idea as well.
Sure.
Because what it ends up trying to do is tries too much ecumenicism. It tries to get people of different faiths to start, oh, we agree on X, we agree on Y, we don't agree on Z, but maybe we can find some kind of hybrid around Z that, and that shouldn't be happening. That's not necessarily healthy, I think, for any faith. What I think is valuable, though, is that the one thing that people of at the theological level should all be agreeing upon is that something that operates as a theology, and in fact a mature and healthy one, especially one that stood the test of hundreds or thousands of years, has a lot to offer to how we're going to engage in other conversations. Obviously, this is a 180-degree turn from things I would have been saying 10 years ago or 5 years ago from my time with the New Atheists. But I do think that theologians have a tremendous amount to say about, how we should be approaching big questions in the sciences, for example, because whereas, maybe philosophers are interested in them for their own various reasons, the fact is that these big questions about life that we might categorize, whether it's axiological value questions, whether it's ontology, what does it mean to be, what is it to be human? These questions bear upon so much else that people do. Now, I'm not saying that your average theologian has a damn thing to say about how you're going to set up your particle collider. He probably doesn't. But, in terms of being at the table for figuring out what those kinds of results imply, I think that's important. But also finding ways to relate these pieces of information. Scientists are rather famously bad at relating the meaning of their work to everyday people. And, when you talk about the relationship between being a theologian and acting as a theologian and being a minister, there are many people who are actually very well trained at crossing that bridge, and they definitely have a role to play, but also to keep our, I put this when I went on Joe Rogan last year. I put it this way. I said that some religions look up and some religions look down, right? And so what I worry about is that when you strangle the religions that look up, which I mean, they keep their eyes on God and they're aware of sin, okay, simplest expression. When you strangle those, religions that look down start looking a lot more attractive. And those are ones that focus on sin and occasionally remember there's a God that you have to pay attention to. For Marxists, of course, the sin is oppression of one form or another. It doesn't matter which one. And that the God that they're paying attention to is the creation of the kingdom on earth in the form of communism. And so, they are utterly focused on just bashing people over the head for everything. And these perverted, inverted theologies that are not up to the task of relating truly to human meaning and human context for all other aspects of knowledge and being, fill in that gap when you strangle the theologies that haven't lost track. And it's easy to put this in lots of simple terms, but it really is, for me at least, it's humility versus arrogance. Are we subject to the grand order of the world, whether we call this God or not, or are we its creators in microcosm, who, if we work together, can shape the world to our heart's desire? And this is arrogance, hubris. All of the great stories of history warn us about hubris of this type versus humility, prostrate before God in just, or nature, or whatever you want, that's beyond our capacity, our own nature. In fact, being fallen according to religion, that we have our own character flaws, that we shouldn't believe that we have all the answers, that we can order the world and other people around the way that that we like to believe that we can, that it's a temptation, or or whatever. So these theologies that warn adequately about those mistakes, I think, must be in the conversation, and they must be injected with new vigor and new strength, not to create theocracies necessarily. I still think that freedom demands, like, if you want to be a Muslim and I want to be a Christian, freedom demands, if our consciences call us in those directions, that the absolute freedom of conscience says the state can't step in, and really it's nobody else's business to step in and tell you who you can and can't be. But to have these kind of healthy pathways prevents kind of whether it's mold or cancer or gangrene or whatever of these poisoned theologies, these inverse theologies, from growing in that space.
To put it in equally like simplistic terms, or as humility or arrogance, I do feel like it's either joy or mourning in terms of how the faith is celebrated. And it's supposed to be a celebration. And if you're not joyous in that aspect, if there's not something joyful to look forward to, and the self-limiting nature of dogmatic religion really fucked itself on this one, when it only pointed to God is the answer for everything, and no, as you discover things, you're a heretic. You're not actually gaining knowledge and doing, things that you could be celebrating God for bestowing this information on, whatever, however you want to frame it. And so it became more of a retaliation rather than a celebration. And I feel like there's, I don't know if it's gonna be a great reset anyway, right? You may as well recalibrate what it means to express your spirituality or express your faith. Religion, I don't think, was ever necessarily meant to be as concrete as it's been made, because something as intangible as a personal spirituality, I don't feel like you should have. There can be, the ritual, sure. You go through these certain motions when you're working out. You go through these certain motions if you have a martial art, or if you're painting or whatever. These are all things that you do so that you can get better at it. You can get more, apply your focus better. I don't think spirituality is any different in that regard, but I think that when you're limiting the scope of knowledge as a foundational platform of your spirituality, you have hamstrung yourself greatly.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that completely. And this is the state we find ourselves in. Of course, there are the technological changes that create different opportunities, but where these, politics is kind of where you go when you're desperate for control over a world that you're out of control of. And that's a great place for these toxic, control-based, totalitarian ideologies or religions to hide. I think this is exactly the problem. And I'm frustrated, honestly, with the facile response that if we just get back to God and religion, it's all going to be fixed. But half the God and half the religions, I mean, I just saw, it's a big scandal right before Christmas. The guy saying, don't come to mass if you're not vaccinated, because you have to love thy neighbor. In other words, you're taking Jesus's second great commandment and perverting it into this new COVID faith. And for this new religious sacrament that has nothing Christianity, there's nowhere in the Bible that it talks about anything that parallels to get vaccinated to cure yourself of your original sin.
Have you seen woke preacher clips on Twitter?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God.
Man. Oh my gosh. Yeah. The faith has always been, the faiths, I should say, have always been recognized as the perfect delivery mechanism for woke. or for whatever. Well, really for woke. This is the new version of Marxist thought in general, and it's so easy because it's so linguistic to start twisting the meanings of basic theological concepts that merely getting back to go back to church or whatever is no guarantee, because you actually you as the parishioner, as the congregant, actually have to have a level of spiritual basedness to be able to discover and to realize that your pastor or priest is leading you down a primrose path to well, I guess I was going to say hell, but sure, hell on earth. And that maybe that person's misled, maybe that person's complicit. It's very difficult to say. I hate to apply complicity to people who are technically moving something along, but it's because they don't know better. And you're always going to have some who do and some who don't. And I hate to lay blame on somebody who doesn't necessarily deserve it. But what I keep hearing from people, luckily, is that, in a lot of churches, we're seeing these kind of churches that are like woke preachers or whatever, hollowing out. And I keep seeing or hearing from pastors who are taking up the fight, and from priests that their churches are just exploding. Like, people are coming to them, often from, hour-plus long drives each direction to come to a house of worship that is not going along with all this nonsense. But what that means, though, is it's not that the faith precedes the faith does precede the pastor, but what it comes down to, though, is it's that the flock is actually not being led necessarily by the pastor. It's just not simple enough to say we have to get back to God. There's actually got to be a reformation, because we're now at the point where the churches themselves are in virtually every denomination are being corrupted by this as well. Of course, the Reformation was a key part of Enlightenment 1.0, so it's kind of funny that we're having Enlightenment 2.0 and it's guiding a reformation, a re-reformation of the newly corrupted church apparatuses, kind of in reverse. But something, these facile answers aren't simple enough, or aren't good enough, because they're too simple. And so I don't know. I am very encouraged, though, since we started this with Turning Point, and it's, the number of people there who are committing to faith, and they're, turning to traditional values, even if those are rooted in, religion or whatever else, of various stripes, that what we're seeing is this return to that. Because, of course, the point with these, there's no great reset if people are actually connected to the previous culture and decide that that's something worth keeping and preserving in one way or another.
No, that's absolutely right. And and it sounds so scary to some people to talk about, maybe we should kind of push pause on the accelerationism towards this sort of, weirdo transhumanist metaverse future for a minute, and kind of recalibrate and figure out where we are morally, ethically, as a society. There's a lot that we still need to learn in terms of the machines that are available to us to run. I know plenty of adults including myself, who have no idea how to fucking program a computer or code or do any of that shit. And it's like we've gone a little bit further ahead, I think, not necessarily than we need to, but then we're capable of responsibly handling. And I don't know. I've been carpenter for 25 years before I started doing this full time. There's a process. You apprentice, or a degree of that. And for a long time, you actually don't get to pick up tools.
Yeah.
Or you very rarely get to pick up tools. And then when you do, you fuck up. And you stay longer and you fix your mistakes. You do. Nobody else fixes them for you. You do. And that's how you learn. And my 9-year-old goes to school. They hand him a tablet, and if he wasn't doing chores in his own life, if he wasn't being encouraged to do other things, if he wasn't being encouraged to take martial arts or play hockey or whatever, 99% of his learning would be done more or less for him.
Right. Yeah, that's a significant issue. People need to interact with reality, and like you said, they need to be put through learning processes where they make mistakes and they become responsible for those mistakes, and they have to fix the consequences of those mistakes. And there is always this process. So I don't know if you know, I famous with the swords. I practice a martial art, and our teacher is not quite as hardcore old school as one might have been, but he's pretty hardcore old school. And there's a story I sometimes tell. There's this guy who was coming for a while, and he's just a fuck up. There's no other way to put it. He's just a fuck up. And my teacher tolerated him for a while and was quite generous with his time. And then finally didn't realize this guy's just a total fuck up. And he told him, like, look, come with me. And he took him over to the side. Like, we're all standing there. And we're taking, like, we end up with this like 30-minute long break in our thing because he takes this guy over to take him to task or whatever. He's like, here's exercise number 1, here's exercise number 2, here's exercise number 3. And he gets the guy doing them, and we're all like kind of watching. And he's like, you got him? All right. Now, because we're at this retreat, he's like, go down to the hotel, get your shit, pack it, get the fuck out of here. Come back in 3 years. And if you're competent at those 3 exercises, nothing else, if you're competent at those 3 exercises, you can come back. And like he can be a little softer with the rest of us because we're trying and like not being total fuck ups. But when it comes to it, those kinds of lines have to be drawn. And if you're not interacting with reality, you're not learning anything. You can navigate your phone, you can navigate the tablet, you can do all kinds of cool stuff in there. And that's absolutely, for our younger people, a crucial skill going forward in terms of how things in the economy are going to work, et cetera. Participation in daily life, even social life. We're not like, Pandora's box isn't getting closed. But at the same time, if, there's this, it's very naive to believe that we're going to live in digital reality where all we do is sit on our couch and never have to interact with reality, like physical reality. Somebody's going to have to make your freaking couch. Somebody's going to have to build the house that keeps it stable. Actual physical things. And it's not all going to get done by a robot. And if it was, we wouldn't want it to be. And then still somebody's fixing the robots. At some point, and also just for your own development, you've got to get out and interact with physical space, physical reality. And the Black Mirror can be a wonderful tool. We just saw the Indian guy. I was absolutely struck by this in the Summer Olympics. Wins a gold medal, taught himself to throw a javelin on YouTube.
Yeah.
That wasn't the first time he threw a javelin. He didn't just screw around on YouTube a whole bunch, pick up a javelin at the Olympics and win. He refined his technique and he went and he tested against reality. And at some point you have to be doing that. I actually am a huge fan of this kind of apprenticeship model. And I actually think that as the major educational institutions become less legitimate, we're going to see more and more of that. And maybe, I don't know if it leads to almost like a return of like guild systems where people form networks and start helping one another become, competent in various arenas. I don't know what it looks like going forward, but I absolutely agree with you that those kinds of things, putting learners in the active box instead of in the being learned for you box, is going to be absolutely crucial, or we're just going to continue to see the degradation of both education and skills, and thus of society.
Well, to put a 3-dimensional picture to that, Chris Hedges has a book that he wrote a few years back called America, the Farewell Tour. And in it, he highlights the town that I grew up in, Anderson, Indiana, as an example of what happened to a NAFTA town, to a GM town post-NAFTA. And it was, they're largely a factory town. In the 25 years that since NAFTA, it's a racetrack, a Nestle factory, meth labs, and evangelical churches, and that's like it, in a jail. And it's where Mike Pence was the representative from before he became governor and then vice president.
Right.
That's his, and he presided over all of that largely.
Yeah, well, equity equalizes downward, and that's the idea there. You're gonna move everything somewhere else where the workers are cheap. You'll bring them up a little bit. You'll bring us down a lot. All of a sudden, the border matters less because it's basically the same on both sides of the border. This border is just now a socially constructed fiction. Da 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 da. That's kind of the big picture there. And what people don't realize is being lost. I know you can't say words like sovereignty of nations, without being considered this absolute lunatic. There's actually a term, I don't know if you know this term, nationist, that runs in parallel to nationalist. Mm-hmm. And it's a nationist is somebody who believes that nations should be able to exist and be sovereign. What people don't understand, and it's the same thing that we have in the United States. It's supposed to have across, that the 10th Amendment is supposed to defend with the 50 different experimental political entities that are bound together in a union, is that if you don't have different nations doing different things, you don't know when somebody's screwing up royally. You need people doing different things to gather different data, to approach different problems in different ways, just kind of in a very, coarse sense. It's just like the biggest error, besides, of course, it was a intentionally forced upon us error, but one of the biggest errors of the COVID tyranny that we've just experienced for 2 years is that every nation should have basically become its own experimental pot to see what's going to happen, instead of every single one of them doing literally exactly the same thing based on the same, turned out to be not that good models. If we would have had even 30 different, major nations having, 5 or 6 of them taking different approaches, we would have had a treasure trove of data telling us, oh, this works better than that works better than this. And that kind of data is not available when everybody's on the same page, everybody's doing the same thing. So a one world government sounds like, it gets us all on the same page in some regard, where, we all have some stakeholder responsibility to each other. So we can all be kind of, the things that happen in the United States affect Japan. So then the Japanese should have a say about what's going on in the United States. That kind of whole logic all sounds great. But if you don't actually have nations that are entirely sovereign to themselves, you lose that variety, that experimental laboratory that's necessary for producing data. You actually need people screwing up in order to find out what doesn't work. And you need people who are screwing up less to be able to winnow out what aspects of that worked. And so when you start blurring down all of the nations and making them virtually identical, you lose some very important things. And those things are at risk. And by losing them, we put ourselves entirely at risk. It's like those species that end up, dwindling to a very small population. And then maybe they make a recovery, but their genetic diversity is now tremendously dropped. And then they're, whatever disease that 150, I'm trying to think of the word, individuals in the population, at the bottleneck, whatever disease they were susceptible to, now the entire species is susceptible to that on the other side, even if there are tens of millions. So if you bottleneck a population, these kinds of diseases, can wipe out a huge number of things when normally they would have only wiped out maybe 100 or 200 genetic freaks. And same thing happens with if we do this with our countries. An ideological cancer can come along and just sweep the world and ruin everybody if we're all too much on the same page. Nobody has their own spirit and say, this isn't what Americans do. This is anti-American. Well, maybe American ideals are stupid. I don't think they are, but maybe they're the dumb one. Maybe we are the stupid ones. And we said, this is anti-American. We're going to stay free. We're not going to lock down. There will be none of this in America. We have a constitution. If we would have actually stood up to that, maybe it's the right decision. Maybe it was totally dumb. And we would actually have real data about it if we'd actually been collecting real data and caring about real data instead of this being what it seems to have been. But that kind of thing is, kind of the most important argument for keeping the ability to have nations be sovereign is also, of course, the bigger you get, the more blurry and less accurate your politics get. Brussels doesn't have a whole lot to say about what's going on in South Texas. They just don't. And these arguments, of course, were being, at the end of the 18th century, they were the arguments of the day, but they're just as relevant again now as they were then. And how do you deal with this? How do you deal with the fact that the closer you get, and this is a weird paradox of politics, the closer you get to the people, like local politics versus state versus national versus global, the more accurate you are in the ability to meet the needs of the people, but at the same time, the less scrutiny you receive, so the more likely there is to be nepotism and rampant corruptions. This weird paradox of political problems. So the point being, though, that getting away from what comes down to self and then local government and toward this kind of like global hegemony is going to be a disaster, because we're one disaster away from not being able to respond to it and wiping out, creating a catastrophe of untold numbers. Like, look at Europe in the 1940s, 30s, and 40s. Had there been no America to flee to, as the rise of communism in the Eastern Bloc and the rise of Nazism in Germany, fascism in Italy, nowhere to run. That's what everybody says about now. There's nowhere to run, right? Well, there was America. There was England. There was South America even. They even took the Nazis in. So there's nowhere if you end up with one global thing, there's nowhere to run. And so there's nowhere else that becomes kind of that both ideological and physical barrier to a complete catastrophe. So we must be much more sane going forward. You talk about NAFTA, for example, about what are going to be the long-term consequences of these kind of agreements. Yeah, trade agreements have many benefits. They also have many downsides. And at the end of the day, we've got to have more mature conversations that recognize that the role of political entities like nations or states or whatever need, and individuals at the end of the day, need to have more weight put behind them as we think through these things.
Well, and I think that we can be protectionist in terms of humanity, in terms of like maintaining our humanity, because the natural evolution of the marketing is going to tell you, well, because the earth is ruined, because humans are dirty and bad, because we screwed everything up, you're going to be able to find your respite in this virtual world, and there will be you'll have your pod. And maybe you'll have your meat space job. Maybe you won't. Maybe your job is only in the metaverse. Maybe all you do is design NFTs, or you work at a brokerage house or auction house, and that's all you do is hang out in the metaverse and auction off NFTs. And then that's going to get miserable and boring, and they're going to find a way to pollute the metaverse too, when we could take a moment to say, okay, look, according to all of the plans in the fourth industrial revolution, in COVID-19 and the Great Reset, if you look at the Global Health Alliance's framework for what they want to do with the medical industry and self-spreading vaccines and nano diagnosis, and you order up your cure, a drone will fly it to you, you'll ingest it, and boom, you're fixed. And this is, the report came out in February of 2020. We spent a lot of time going through it on the show. It's fucking insane. This is the direction that they want people to go in that. And I think that if what's being dangled in front of us is the complete commodification of nature, and the complete commodification and total surveillance of all living organisms, that human beings, most of us, God, I want to believe this, are naturally resistant enough to that idea, that with the right conversations around it, with the right people putting forth the idea that maybe we as human beings can have it, not necessarily like an interfaith summit about this, but like a interhuman fucking, if we could get people together on the same page that are resisting this all over the planet, because they are. I've got clips from all around the world that I may end up playing today of people, coming out on Christmas Day to protest lockdowns, coming out, in all kinds of weather to stand next to their neighbor, regardless of ideology, regardless of religion or whatever, to protest abject tyranny. Then I do think that there's a way to, to recalibrate without doing the Great Reset. Hopefully,
I think so too.
Too much there.
I think so too. Their view is always that we're just not quite technologically savvy enough to provide for the needs of the complexities of humanity. And each one of the kind of big attempts has been, oh yeah, we are now. We have industrial economies. We have production lines. We can now. Big failure. And now the big thing is AI. We have AI. We'll be able to, you see, everybody's on their phone all the time thinking they're having social interactions, and it's making them anxious and depressed. But with the metaverse, when we get the AI up high enough, it'll replace your social life and it'll actually be fully psychologically satisfying. In fact, you'll be able to buy memories, you'll be able to trade memories, you'll be able to make fabricated memories. People are going to have the most unbelievable experiences, and they're all going to remember having had them. And everybody's life is basically going to be that of a rock star constantly all the time. But I think that it's very likely that, and I tend to agree with you, that the human factor here is going to be a bit bigger than they reckon, and that people are not going to find this satisfactory, and that they are going to continue to protest, and they are going to realize that, what's actually at stake here, when you talk about what freedoms are at stake, is that their cognitive liberty is the thing that's lurking at stake. The ability to think for yourself. You can have your free speech, you can have your free assembly, you can have your free whatever, if they can contour how you think before you ever open your mouth or meet with anybody. And, I get, again, it comes back to that hubris. I think they think that they have a greater grip on the way the world works and the way human beings are than they actually do. And I think that humans, I really do think that the majority of humans are going to reject this, even if they make it very uncomfortable to reject it.
This is why we've spent the last couple of years screaming about the fact that there's pre-crime, and that's real. And there's a guy named Daniel Baker who is currently serving out a sentence for it. And one of the things that we've been trying to point out to our friends on the left is that since we're knocking on the door of the anniversary to the insurrection, I don't know if you had the opportunity to be at the Capitol that day. I was. It was wild. But that legislation went into effect. The first arrest was a week and a half after January 6th, and it was like an Antifa lefty. And almost all of the pre-crime related events and domestic terror events that have been, stopped, thwarted, or arrest made, all of them have rolled on the left. And these are the people who were begging for the laws and begging for the censorship and begging for the deplatforming. And they've received the majority of the state's boot. When push came to shove, they're about ready to line up people and lock them up, with the exception of the prisoners from January 6th, who I do feel like are legitimate political prisoners in this thing.
Mm-hmm.
I was, standing there for a good chunk of that and saw what went down. I'm trying to remember but the reason that we keep screaming about pre-crime as a reality is because unless more people are aware of this, unless more people are watching how the state operates day to day, and this is why I love what you're doing with the critical pedagogy stuff and trying to get people activated on a local level in their educational system on behalf of their kids' educational future, because local is the only way we can make any of this shit happen. The reason I bring up pre-crime is all going to tie together. It is, I promise, it's all going to come together. There's a huge sentiment that we can't do this without co-opting our sheriff's department. you know, and I think that with the work that you're doing at the local level for education, or at least helping people understand that better so that they can go do the work at the local level, that helps plant the seeds with people in that particular branch of law enforcement in the community, who by and large, a lot of them do have kids that go to school. One of my best friend's kids, when we lived in the Santa Cruz Mountains, his dad was a, that's like Santa Clara County sheriff. Anyway, the sheriffs don't like the pre-crime either. The sheriffs don't like a lot of the things that they're being asked to do for COVID. They don't like a lot of the things that they're being asked to do. And when law enforcement has to come face to face with the unjust laws that they're enforcing, becomes a little bit easier to get them to flip on the employer and realize that, if you want to work within your community, you have to be a part of your community, and you can't. Doing a lot of things.
Yeah, and so much actually, like you just were poking at, or so much actually ties back to the kids. And of course, the communist understands this, and most people don't realize its significance. Exactly like you said, the sheriff isn't a faceless. People in his office, his deputies, are not faceless. The faceless machine that's run like a gigantic corporation. They are individuals whose children go to the schools, who are probably participatory in the church locally, and who do have to live in that community. And while they have been vested by that community with some authority and power in return for protection and safety, at the same time they in service, I should say, key there, but at the same time, they have to be able to look those people. They are people with faces that are tied into that. And so when you start to localize, and we start to realize that kind of networks of local things are more along the lines of what we need to be moving toward, rather than these gigantic federal or supranational apparatuses that have no face. Like, who in the world has not had this? Everybody's had this experience now. You're having a trouble, maybe it's with your stupid Obamacare or some bullshit that you got roped into, and you call them, and it's like you have to go through like a 20-minute process of talking to a freaking robot just to talk to a person, and then that person is still like disconnected and is face. They are in a sense very faceless because it's over the phone or text messages or whatever, but they're just an apparatus of a gigantic machine that's employing thousands upon thousands of people, etc. That it's just not. It's not what anybody. It's like when you pause and reflect upon that experience, you call the freaking airline or whatever, and it's like, would you like to take a service about your customer? No. And you have to, argue with this thing. I didn't understand that command. Could you say it again? And it's like you have to argue with this stupid recording thing. It just goes to show you that, we actually do flourish better when, granted, there's a great deal of efficiency there, but we flourish better when we sacrifice some of that efficiency for local accountability, face-to-face connection, etc. And so when we start thinking about how we want to start shaping the communities of the future, where we avoid this great reset, but adapt to the technological changes and circumstantial changes that we have in front of us and challenges that we have that come with that putting a premium on locality and facefulness rather than facelessness is going to be a huge component to that, because it's what retains the human.
I couldn't agree more. That's a really great way of putting that.
I'm really pissed off now thinking about calling those things and you just talk to a recording, and I can even picture my wife calling one a few weeks ago, and it's like it doesn't understand what she's saying, so she's like yelling at it, and a bunch of them now have actually got like built into it. If you yell at it, it detects that you're yelling and gives you a real person. So the fastest way to get to a real person is just to flip out on the recording for no reason.
Yeah. No, I had to spend probably 40 hours total with Viasat, who contracts for Starlink, Elon Musk's internet company.
Yeah.
And it was It was all of that. It was all of that. I mean, for days on end of just screaming into a phone, human now,
Yeah,
until
and remember,
and then you,
yelling at a that's being recorded for quality assurance purposes, which means it's also going to be pre-crime that you're an unstable lunatic that you're yelling at a recording before very long.
I mean, we've determined that your propensity towards violence is escalating, and therefore we've come to round you up preemptively, lest you go take out your rage on a inanimate object, recording on the phone. Go
Yeah.
shoot your neighbor. Yeah, no, no, I'm going to resist that. I'm going to resist that to the core of my
Yeah.
being.
And it's infinitely different, even though it's much less efficient when you're actually calling some guy named John that you're going to see on Tuesday down at the bowling alley or whatever. John,
Yeah.
what the heck was that about? You know?
So it took 40 hours to finally get the one local contractor who handles installation and maintenance and stuff like that out to the property where we were at. And he's like, oh yeah, no, here's the number for the text line for me and for my office manager, and only call us, never call them, never ever do
Yeah.
that. It's going to be a nightmare. And it really, there's, with available technology, with ways that I don't, here's the thing, the Internet of Things promises massive holes in the earth and rare earth mineral mining and lithium mining and coltan and cobalt and all of the wars that would come with it, unless we kind of figure out a way to scale back. I guess, I don't know, mass production, maybe mass agriculture, definitely. I feel like there's no legitimate reason for me to be in Central California and having my beef come from Argentina. Seems a little weird, or Brazil or wherever, I don't feel like that has to happen. But I don't have the answers to those, or, their thoughts. I'm certainly not I don't have the qualifications to do, I mean, planning for just humanity's future to that degree. Feel like we could dial it back a little bit though and plant gardens, and that might go a long way.
Yeah. I don't have big picture answers either, but I know that the more disconnected and faceless we get, the more places where we're going to run into these kinds of frustrations that are unnecessary and antisocial. And the less, again, you up efficiency, but at the cost of humanity. Not to sound like a Marxist, because there's, of course, it's just upside down. They say that and mean the opposite. But yeah, I agree with you. There's some definite, if we're going to call the situation we find ourselves in necessitating some kind of a great reset, there are, the one that is the great reset is a terrible acceleration of exactly the problems that allegedly necessitate it in the first place, whereas we should, doing things differently and maybe even the more along the lines of how we used to do, rather than accelerating down this road, seems to be like something that's a good first step, at least in a different direction.
Yeah, I don't feel like I'm the only person on the planet who is wired to want to go the opposite direction when someone like Klaus Schwab is coming at me looking the way that he looks, saying, hey, this is my plan for your future and your children's future.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm alone in that.
Certainly not.
I've wanted to, there was a particular clip that I wanted to pull up while you were here, because it's Bill Gates, just 8 seconds of Bill Gates' unmitigated joy over the idea that we may be removing Social Security benefits for people who do not take the jabby jab. And it was edited by my friend Jamie Deluxe, so there's a little sploosh at the end.
Social Security, you need to be vaccinated if you want to get whatever benefits they give. You need to be vaccinated.
Just the glee.
Yeah. At taking away people's hard-earned benefits because they're not complying with something that they probably don't need in the first place under pretenses that are not clearly articulated. But yeah, there's something definitely wrong with that guy. I 2 years ago was defending him against some of these accusations, and I just am kind of horribly ashamed of that now. There's something definitely wrong with that guy. Like, he's got his weird vision for how everything's supposed to go, almost like a schizoid. And when it matches up with the fairy tale in his head, he gets just giddy. And when it doesn't, you see him, he tucks his hands, he starts rocking, he gets real weird. There's something wrong with that guy. I don't know any other way to put it.
I mean, we could joke about the bad batch of adrenochrome smoothie, but I mean, his father was a hardcore eugenicist.
Correct.
The whole family line of the Gateses goes back to some fairly brutal, fairly, I guess, far looking into the future with a very specific type of people at the top of it, family. And it used to be complete conspiracy theory nonsense to point out to who Bill Gates's family was, and to point out a lot of the things that Bill Gates had done and said in public out loud over the years. And I feel like now, because we're in this period of acceleration, it really does feel like the foot has gone to the gas pedal in the last 5 years. It really does feel like we're being pushed to hit some target dates that we didn't necessarily set for ourselves. That one of the fallouts from this acceleration is our availability to access information, to process it in real time, and to talk to each other in real time about it. Mm-hmm. And now something like Bill Gates has a plan to push digital ID. Oh, and also he's a eugenicist. Oh, and also he's got, been kicked out of the global South in a number of countries. Oh, and also he just partnered with who? Hang on. Where'd the slash dot? This is crazy, actually. Where'd it go? God damn it. Oh, yeah. Construction starts on 47-acre fusion reactor funded by Google and Bill Gates. So not only does he have nuclear reactors in Wyoming with Warren Buffett, but now he's got a fusion reactor, not a fission reactor, a fusion reactor with Google. Google, of course, an Alphabet / DARPA company. Eric Schmidt on the board for the National Security Council for Artificial Intelligence. Yeah, Bill Gates is a creepy little fuck, man. Really have a nice way to put that.
To get that excited about the idea of taking away what amounts to, somebody's retirement that they've worked their entire lives for and thought they could count on. People in his own age demographic, people that, it's not like some generational warfare, like, haha, them kids. It's like, no, these are people, there's no possible mentally healthy space in which somebody can be gleeful about that. Like, we'd be having a completely different conversation possibly about the guy, maybe, if his reaction were one, and genuinely so, if that's possible, where he's like, well, it just seems so necessary and it's a horrific thing. We don't want this to have to happen, but we have no other options. But it's no, he's like, he, take their shit away, put the needle in him. He, oh my gosh. And you can just see it on him. And if he gets asked a weird question that obviously pokes a hole in all of his little games, he starts rocking like a weirdo. Like, there's something wrong with the guy. Then it's not good. He's also, by the way, in addition to everything you said, he's given untold millions of dollars to setting up all of the foundations, or not all of them, many of the foundations that are putting critical race theory and social emotional learning programs into our schools to poison our kids psychologically.
Yeah, as well as buying millions positive media coverage for whatever initiative he's pushing. And you can find Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation tucked away on just all kinds of articles. Between him and Warren Buffett and a handful of other financiers, all funded through what we've been calling Rockefeller education for 20 some years now. I don't know. I have kids in school. My high schooler goes to public school. My 9-year-old, my second grader, is not in public school. I'm fortunate in that the high school that my kid goes to is like flatly anti-woke, like flatly. His English teacher is an awesome guy, and sent the sophomore class home the history teacher, whole thing on Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot. And I was like, he called me up. He's like, yeah, I've got to do a thing on, communism. We got to do a thing on Mao. I'm like, oh, really? What's your teacher giving you on that? And he emailed me, and I'm like, wow, this is real. This is That's not awesome. A highly fantastical, fictionized, celebration of all things for the proletariat. I mean, it was an accurate description of what Mao did, where he came from, who he worked for. John D. Rockefeller was mentioned in Mao's biography from this teacher. And I'm like, holy shit, these kids may have a chance in this one public school, but I can't hold that up as an example of all of them. But it is nice to know that on some level, there's a handful of teachers that are holding out. One of the discouraging things that I've seen over the last year is teachers who were pushing back on this and trying to offer some resistance, throw their hands up and go, it's too much. I can't take it anymore. I'm out.
Yeah. I mean, that's the entryist program, is to push the good ones out by making it intolerable, and then to fill them in with ideologues through various hiring mechanisms that are strongly slanted or biased.
It's also how you get Los Angeles Sheriff Department murder gangs.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Push the good ones out. James Lindsay, thank you so much for being generous with your time. I know you're a very busy guy. You got a lot going on.
True.
Will you please, pitch whatever you have coming up and plug all of your ventures and whatnot. And just thank you so much for the conversation.
So most people know me on Twitter. That's at Conceptual James. I'm pretty wild on there. I don't think I'm too wild, but I'm fun. The company is New+Discourses. Website is newdiscourses.com. The handle for the company is at New+Discourses on most of the social media. I use Conceptual James on Twitter, but it gets mirrored on most of the other social media if you don't like Twitter. But you're getting roughly the same content. Kind of the biggest thing to plug coming forward is through New+Discourses. We just published a book somebody else wrote called Counter Wokecraft. That's about, how you can work with this ideology in an administrative setting and actually start to push back successfully. Written by a college professor who has had enough of this and has had some success in his own school pushing back with these techniques. And but we've got coming up. I've written a book. We're getting it typeset now, and when it's ready, typeset, we can put it out. That's going to be called Race Marxism. That I think I'm going to try to make the definitive word on critical race theory and its long history, its relationship to previous movements like critical theory, and which is better known as critical Marxism, or better understood as critical Marxism, but also Marxism before that, Hegelian thought before that, Rousseauian thought before that. I kind of stopped there. It could keep going backwards, but mid 1700s is a good place to put a break on it. And that should be coming, I'm hoping, before too long in January, actually. So Race Marxism is going to be the title of that. and it's about critical race theory. I've got to nail down the subtitle and get it typeset, and otherwise we're done. So should be a heavy, long read if you really want to understand critical race theory forward and backward. So look forward to that.
I gotta say, man, it's your podcast is invaluable to, especially to anybody with kids in school, but just in general, because none of this shit makes sense when you first encounter of it.
Right,
It's not supposed to. I know it's not supposed to.
That's right. That's right.
So being able to have it explained by someone who is, an incredibly intelligent human being, you get a PhD in mathematics, you're not a fucking dumbass, but to have it put in a way that is broken down to the layman, because it is intentionally obtuse and intentionally dense and supposed to be its own language with its own definitions for words, has been tremendously helpful. So I do have found your show to be of tremendous value. Appreciate it.
That's so people can know that's the New Discourses podcast, and I'm currently very loosely, I'm not like exclusively doing it, but I'm working on a very long series of critical pedagogy or critical education theory, kind of in more lay terms, so that people can understand what has taken over the schools, how it developed since really about the late 1960s, early 1970s, but crucially early 1980s. And people can understand what is really going on in schools, what its purpose is. And so there's this kind of long, diffuse series that'll be sprinkled with other things I end up wanting to say. So if you aren't listening to the podcast yet, New Discourses podcast, and you are concerned about or interested in what's going on in the schools or have kids, you probably want to at least kind of like lock into this. Maybe you haven't been super interested in 1960s philosophers, critical theorists, but I'm going to break down what the Marxist turn in education has been, and why it's a shocking fact, for example, that we have a teacher in a high school in America teaching about actual communists and what the real legacies of communism is, because what we've got is a massively red-washed education, because the communists massively took over education about 40 years ago. And so I'm trying to, I don't know how long the series will be. It might end up being almost 30 podcasts by the time I'm done with it. But I want to go through a lot of that history in rather considerable detail and summarize different people's arguments through time and show how that's evolved and taken over.
Well, awesome. That's gonna do it for this episode of Slow News Day. Thanks again to James+Lindsay. Big shout out to Glory Jones, who could not be here today. I was so hoping my co-host could be here, because she's a college senior at Loyola Marymount in international relations. It's like, I was really hoping to because she's one of the handful of Zoomers I've ever met in my life that has seen through this bullshit from more or less day one, and is just like an anomaly walking around out here. Like her and Olivia Rondo need to team up and take over the world. So we'll be back. Let's see. Tomorrow, I've got Adam Kokesh tomorrow. Adam just spent about 12 days in a winter activist summer camp fighting the Squatch, Colorado Sheriff's Department. He is now, as a veteran, legally allowed to possess psilocybin in the state of Colorado, in which he does not live. That's how well it went for him. We're going to get into all of that and much more. Stick around for that. Full week of shows, and have no idea what's going on New Year's Day yet at all, if we're even going to do a thing. We may celebrate National Hangover Day, even though I don't drink anymore. We might. Who knows? But big thanks for hanging out, being a part of it. We love you guys. We'll see you soon. Good luck to us all.